Welcome to Kinwise Conversations, the podcast where we explore how artificial intelligence can build a more human, equitable, and purpose-filled world. Today, I am joined by Babak Mostaghimi. Babak is a founding partner at Learner Studio and a former assistant superintendent at Gwinnett County Public Schools, where he led one of the nation's first K-12 AI readiness initiatives long before ChatGPT was a household name. Babak's journey into education didn't start in a boardroom. It began with his family's story as refugees fleeing religious persecution in Iran, a place where, even today, members of the Baha'i faith are barred from higher education. That history instilled in him a belief that education is the ultimate unlocking force for democracy and human potential. From the rural porches of Appalachia and the Mississippi Delta to the halls of Harvard and the tech-forward classrooms of Georgia, Babak has spent his career re-architecting systems to ensure they work for everyone. Today, we're diving into his three horizons model of innovation, the difference between snorkeling and scuba diving and AI, and why he believes we must Marie Kondo the curriculum to make room for what truly matters, our shared humanity. Babak, thank you so much for being here. I'm so interested in your story and what's led you to your work with education and your work with artificial intelligence. I want to start by asking you to share a little bit about your journey. What brought you to the work that you're doing and what motivates you to keep on keeping on?
Yeah, fair enough. Lydia, thanks so much for having me. I came to education and the work around AI in a windy way, right? And it all started with this belief that I really believe in an America that is fair for everyone, where everyone has a fair shot at life. I believe this for my neighbors and family who I grew up with in Appalachia. I believe this for the folks I hung out with in Baltimore City. I believe this for the people I got to build with in the Mississippi Delta and everybody here in Georgia and everywhere in between. And I just really believe that we can do this as a country. I think we can create a future that's better for everyone, that there isn't a fixed pie. For me, this belief has led me to this place where I think education is an unlocking force for that. It's a way of making it so that everyone can achieve their potential and be what they want to be. I know it sounds super cliche, but it's one of those rare tools that can actually do that, right? Now, obviously, there are all sorts of other systems and structures, but I think education is the tool to unlock those other systems and structures and make them better for the world. So that's kind of what brings me to the work.
Was there a moment in your journey where you saw how powerful education could be and it kind of flipped that switch for you?
So my family came to the United States as refugees fleeing religious persecution in Iran. And one of the most interesting things and values that was brought up with all growing up was this value of the importance of education. At the time and still now, Baha'is in Iran are unable to get high school diplomas and unable to enroll in college and those sorts of things just by virtue of their religion. And when structures like that exist, it makes you realize how important education must be if people are trying to prevent you from having it and keeping it, right? And so for me, I've had this thing sort of growing up my entire life. My grandfather's 97 years old. He still thinks about it and talks about education and how important it is. But at the same time, in my own personal life, I've also seen these remarkable moments where young people have just unlocked a completely different future for themselves by both making a decision to jump in something really, really well and learn it really well, but also by having a great adult who's facilitating that learning and supporting them in growing that dream. I think of my kids, I think of people like Laquita, like Sabrina, like Rochelle, who have set out on a different path than the whole sort of rest of what the world imagined they would be doing, just by virtue of embracing education for what it could be.
That's really beautiful and you have such an interesting perspective because I feel like you kind of had this understanding of the importance of education imbued into you from your entire life. You didn't have this moment where it was oh, this is the thing. It's everything about your experience as a person, I think, has really just reinforced that for you. And that must be a really powerful, purpose-filled way that you navigate the world.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, it's one of those moments where you realize that this thing that's so important to me is actually also important to everyone else, or should be. And when I say education, I want to be really clear that I don't mean the sit down book learning education. I guess that's a part of it, but just this idea of flowing through life as though everything is graduate school, right? As though every moment is a moment where you can learn something from it, whether it's hard or not. It's sitting on a porch with somebody in rural Mississippi, or it's sitting in the tall buildings of New York City. Every moment, I think, is something you can learn from and grow from and hopefully use to give back to the world with.
That's such a state of being. And so now you've kind of And, for several years now, you've been thinking about artificial intelligence and what that means for education. And so I'm curious, you just talked about this kind of education as a state of being, right? You're like,
Yeah.
just everything is an opportunity to learn. And now we have this new technology that you're really focused on. And I wonder, how do those things connect for you?
Yeah. So back in 2017, I was working for Gwinnett County Public Schools and I was heading up innovation. And the superintendent there at the time asked me to sort of help Gwinnett County Public Schools, which is a really big system, really innovative system, very successful system to prepare itself for the future. Right. And he had this belief that Gwinnett County Public Schools is blockbuster video and that Netflix is coming. Right. And he asked me to figure out, like, what is the Netflix that's coming? Like, what do we need to be doing? What do we need to be preparing our kids for? And in the process of diving into this question, I ran into these like reports about automation, about artificial intelligence. And at that point, they were saying like the first major effects would be felt by like 2035, 2040, that sort of deal. And so in the moment, we recognized the urgency of it because we thought, hey, if the purpose of school is to prepare young people for their future, right? And their future is going to be fundamentally different because of automation and AI, we need to be getting kids ready for that world. And we didn't mean that in just like a technical sense of like learn how to use AI and like learn what the pieces of it are and that sort of stuff. Yes, that's like a part of it. But really, how do you walk through a world that's AI infused? How do you think critically? How do you navigate with empathy? How do you have the ethical understanding of what should and shouldn't happen and all those sorts of things, right? And so it literally was December 2017. I was reading the report, Jobs Lost, Jobs Gained by the McKinsey Global Institute, when it just like hit where I was like, oh, this is it. Like we have to do something about this and do it quickly. And so for me, the interesting piece, and it sort of connects with what I'm working on now at Learner Studio, is that the entire purpose of education is to inspire and prepare young people for life, career, and democracy. Those three things are shifting fundamentally because of the age of AI, right? And they're shifting in ways that impact both the individual good and the common good. And I believe that young people need to be prepared for that world and to not just prepared in terms of like, let's take it on, whatever it hits us with, but actually to build the world that we want and to create the future that we all want and need.
Yeah, you mentioned these three things, right? Life, career, and democracy. And I'm wondering if you could share an example of how you are seeing right now AI changing life, career, and democracy.
Yeah. So life is easy. Literally everywhere, whether we know it or not, AI is impacting us. AI has been infused into the algorithms that do everything from play around with our retirement accounts and those sorts of things, all the way to sometimes what medical care we receive or not. The imaging systems that are used to screen us for cancer are now starting to use bits and pieces of AI and machine learning to figure it out. But at the same time, it's having really, really interesting impacts on our youth, right? Like for the first time ever, youth can have friends who aren't real people. And that's having major impacts. We've had terrible impacts. We've had really great impacts from it. And so life is changing in really big ways. The career side, we have so much data that's showing that AI is impacting the first couple of rungs of the career ladder for people going into white collar work in particular, right? So the idea of having like a junior analyst when AI can do it for like sort of pennies on the dollar compared to a human is literally changing what careers exist and how kids can get into them and what companies are doing with it. On the democracy front, just like left and right, like the misinformation, the targeted ads that we can get and create with AI have made it so that people really have to be discerning in a way that they've never had to before, right? Like you used to be able to trust your eyes. And now we're like, actually, no, you got to look at that video a little bit closer. You got to listen to that audio a little bit closer. Was it actually the person or not? Is that something that person would have said or not, right? Does that fit within all the history and things that you know about the world, right? And so I think those three things are fundamentally already changing. They're going to change even faster as we go along. For better or worse, when we don't lead on that, and we, meaning like the sort of regular folks, really bad things end up happening, right? Because people have crazy profit motives or crazy power motives. And that's why I think every single young person, every single person like us out there in the world should know AI, understand what it is and isn't, and sort of help make the world that we want to create.
That's really powerful. And thank you for sharing those examples. I know for you, you talked about 2017 was your moment where you were like, this is going to be impactful. And then you worked in Gwinnett County schools and helped them kind of plan and prepare for that. And now you're at Learner Studios. And so I'm curious about that journey. Like what happened at Gwinnett County and what did you learn there? And then how did you move to Learner Studios and what are you taking in there? I think I'm interested in the progression, especially because I imagine over the past 8 years. You learned a lot and your
Yeah.
perspective changed a lot. And so what did you do? What did you learn? And what are you thinking about now?
Man, such a big question. I love it. So in Gwinnett, when we had this moment in 2017 that we need to do something, we used it to think strategically and systematically, right? Like Gwinnett isn't a place where you just have like a one-off program or a cool project or something like that. When we do things, we go all in or not at all, right? And you'll notice I'll still say we because I love Gwinnett County Public Schools so much. And like I literally was in Gwinnett schools last week working on a new revision to the framework and things. But essentially what we did was starting in 2017, we pulled together experts from across the country, as much as you could find experts in AI and from industry and those sorts of things. And we started saying, hey, look, we believe that this is a thing, that AI and automation are going to be a big deal. What do we need to do about it? So we created an AI readiness framework, which included everything around data science and mathematical reasoning and those sorts of things, but also had a really big push on ethics, on creative problem solving, and on what's now called applied experiences. So ways to utilize and leverage AI in like robotics and sort of day-to-day life and those sorts of things. And what we realized was that we didn't want the same thing to happen to AI as it did to computer science, which was, hey, let's stick it in a room by itself, like the weird room down the hallway. But instead, let's actually, from the start, treat it like something that's part of everything, because that's how it's going to be. And so we created a continuum of learning that was grade band based. So like K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12. There was like, what are the different skills in these different areas of learning that kids need to learn? When do they need to learn? How do we create progressions across grade levels starting in kindergarten and make sure that kids are ready for their future? And we built that. And notice how I'm always saying we, because it's just not just like some Babak sitting in some corner by himself, right? We had like in the continuum over 160 teachers with a blank piece of paper going, hey, we recognize that this is a problem and that this right on the horizon. What are we going to do about it, right? And so together we built the infrastructure for how do you take these ideas and weave them into your regular lesson plans? How do we, what we called it AI upgrading your lesson plan, right? And it wasn't about tools because the tools didn't exist yet, right? But it was like, let's start there and let's take it from there. So yeah, so we ended up building out like a K-12 AI readiness pathway. This was before ChatGPT came out and all that sort of stuff. So when ChatGPT made its sort of big debut, we're like, oh, sweet, good. Like we weren't wrong, right? Because you always have this moment of like, am I really, like, are we doing the right thing? And so we built out this school. We started figuring out, like we built out a 3-course AI pathway for career and technical education for the whole state of Georgia, which then got embraced by some other school districts and schools. We started helping people across the country figure out what to do because we felt it was so important to spread our learning to everywhere because it was just needed, right? And so we got to this place about 2 years ago where I realized that the work was sort of up and running and like really great things were happening. We had a really strong team. We had strong leadership in place and those sorts of things. And I started looking for the next problem as it related to AI in education. And I started realizing that there's like a systems problem that also is occurring, right? Like it's one thing to nail down the what, right? But we had amazing principals who were like rowing against the water all the time. And I was trying to figure out why is the water flowing in the wrong direction? And in exploring that, I ran into Kim Smith, who is the founder of New Schools Venture Fund, one of the founders of Bellwether Education Group, founded the Pahara Institute and Lone Rock and like all these things, like real amazing lady. And she was talking about how she was putting together a team to re-architect public education for the future. And realizing that the reason that water was flowing in the wrong direction was because the system was built for a world that no longer exists. And there's only so much you could do to sort of work within the system because you'd always hit this peak barrier you couldn't go past. And so for the last 2 years, we've been re-architecting public education with a bazillion partners who have been working on what does the future of learning look like for every young person in America.
That is such an ambitious thing to be doing, to think about what does this look like and how is that changing? You just told such a rich story. So I think I'm going to kind of ask you some questions from each part, and then we'll end back up at Learner Studio. But one thing I was wondering when you were talking about your work in Gwinnett County, it seems that Gwinnett County is like an incredibly well-resourced school district to be able to partner with so many people and have you working on this. And then you were able to be ahead of the curve and have great opportunities for students even before ChatGPT launched. And I wonder if you have advice or thoughts, because I know you've worked in Mississippi and and I I don't know what the school district you were like was, but I've done some work in Mississippi, and where I
Yeah.
was not super well resourced. I'm wondering, for a school that isn't as well resourced, we're further along. AI is here, and we have already talked about how it's causing some disruptions. How do
Yeah.
schools that aren't as well resourced make the changes that you're talking about? And that may also connect to some of the systems level work you're doing, but I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so let me disrupt the thought process here because I think everyone automatically assumes that we're well resourced, and that's why we were able to pull it off. But Gwinnett County Public Schools is actually not very well resourced, and everything that I talked about is actually built off of the regular per pupil expenditures for every single child. And we end up receiving state categorical funding to make up for the fact that your population is bigger than your proportionate tax
Whoa,
base.
okay. So what did you do? How did you do
Yeah,
it?
to give you a sense structure wise, right? Our innovation department, when it started off with literally just me, right? Just Babak Mostaghimi. There are 26,000 employees in Gwinnett County Public Schools, right? The vast majority are teachers and frontline staff and those sorts of things. And our superintendent at the time, a gentleman named J. Alvin Wilbanks, really remarkable man, was like, hey, we need to innovate, but we need to innovate within our constraints and our budget, right? And so he was like, Babak, you're going to figure this out, and you're going to figure out via influence how to get other people on board. So like our school design team for second-year high school was a set of people who all had other jobs during the day, right? The executive director of curriculum instruction and of career and technical education and all these other people who had full-time jobs. And we were all together on this design team for the new high school and for the AI work. We would pull in our leadership development people, our regular people to think differently for a moment, to build for the future. And then not only would they go back to doing their regular daytime job, but they take many of these ideas and take them back with them to whatever they were working on at the time. Even the school, when it was opening up, it was extremely diverse. Like Gwinnett County Public Schools, for example, at the time, I think these numbers are about right now, is like 26% white, 33% Latino, 32% African American, about 10% Asian, and then a bunch of other people like me who I've never figured out what box to check. And so like really, really diverse and very, very diverse economically as well. And actually, the place where we were building this school was similarly diverse in terms of economics and in terms of like race and background and those sorts of things. And the reason, and even the school itself that we built, like many people are like, oh, is this some sort of a magnet school, like a special entity for kids? We're like, no, it can't be, because if we believe that every person, should we use this lingo, should be able to swim in the world of AI, snorkel in the world of AI, or scuba dive in the world of AI, that means it has to be everybody. It can't be just some small set somewhere, right? And so here's what I'd say to people. I started teaching in rural Mississippi. I was in Shelby, Mississippi. Our average household income for a family of four was like $14,000 a year at the time, right? So like extremely impoverished area. I didn't have literally enough desks for kids to sit in for the first like 6 months of teaching. I actually think they can do this just as well as anyone else. And in fact, they may be better situated in the sense of there aren't huge systems and bureaucracies and structures that they have to shift. What we're really talking about is preparing young people to be great human beings. And actually, in many of the rural areas that I've been, people have the strongest connection to what it means to be a good person, what it means to be empathetic, what it means to support your democracy and to build a good life and those sorts of things. So my hope is actually what we've built is something that anyone can pick up and use.
Right. In rural areas, or may have a different set of resources than your more urban resources. I think there's some, like in a school district that has 26,000 employees, that's a lot of people, but you also have bureaucracy that you're navigating. Whereas a school district where maybe you have 26 district employees, maybe there's more as a whole district, but you have less bureaucracy. I was talking to a teacher who's done a lot of AI leadership in rural Montana, and he's like, yeah, I could just go talk to the superintendent when I wanted to. It's impossible in a larger district. And so I think one thing, as you were talking, it made me think about how do you play to the strengths that you do have to be able to move forward for students, because there are advantages to having a huge population of employees you can pull from. And there's also bureaucracy that you have to navigate that can slow everything down.
Well, and you're just trying to, I mean, think about it. When I lived in Mississippi, the town I worked in as a teacher, like the school district would serve 5 different towns or 4 different towns. The school district office was across the street. It was like an old house across the street from the school, right? And so if I wanted to do something, I just had to convince like 10 people and we could get it done, right? People were generally like politically aligned, like geographically aligned in terms of their family histories and stuff. come to a place like Gwinnett, you have 1 million residents. You have people who are extremely far right. You have people who are extremely far left. You have people who are brand new to here, people who've been here for a long time. It gets really complicated to places that don't even have basic resourcing, right? So like we have parts of America where schools have like intermittent internet access and those sorts of things. And those are major challenges that have to get fixed. But for the vast majority of people, I think access to both the technologies and the type of learning we need is far more accessible than we think.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to go now to your learner studio work, because I think we were talking a little bit about urban systems versus rural systems and how those look. And so could you talk with me a little bit about, as you're thinking about schools of the future, what does that look like in relation to AI, and what are some aspects of places you've worked where you've said, okay, this part of the system actually is something we should pull forward and this is something we need to change? Yeah, what are y'all thinking about?
That's a great question. So at Learner Studio, we have this 3 horizons model that we use to talk about education innovation and what's been going on. How the 3 horizons model works is it essentially talks about the sort of rise and fall of different types of innovation over time. So it's used a lot in industry in that arena. For us, the first horizon in terms of education innovation was the traditional sort of industrial model of schooling. That was a major innovation. This idea of like, we're going to have people at scale learn stuff was really remarkable. We're going to have compulsory education. We're going to make sure that every kid has a classroom to go into, right? It was really remarkable innovation for its time. And at the same time, its goal really wasn't to make sure everyone succeeded. It was to sort of sort people into, oh, like you're going to be a doctor because you're like really smart. And you're going to be a worker because your family is not really smart. Like it wasn't the best system in the world, right? But it worked. It was innovative for a time in terms of what it was trying to do. And then there came this period of time that started, I would say, in the 90s in particular, but it existed for a long time, where this second horizon of innovation began emerging, right? And this was this efficiency equity innovation, which if you think about people who are really big into social emotional learning, into charter schools, into those sorts of things, you start seeing a set of people who are like, wait, hold on, that old stack and sort model doesn't work. And it's like really not fair. And a whole lot of people aren't doing well by it, right? And so they started building out really cool innovations that made it so that like their mantra was like college and career readiness for everyone, right? Like, let's make sure every kid can read. Let's make sure every kid can do math, those sorts of things. And we're going to show it on these test scores and like we're going to hold people accountable and all that sort of stuff. Even the social emotional learning stuff that was happening on average, not everywhere, but on average, people are realizing, oh, a kid has to feel good about themselves in order to be able to do well academically, right? So the sort of primary thrust was still in school buildings, 6.5 hours a day, 180 days a year, all that sort of stuff, right? And what happened in that movement and what is happening still in that movement, because both the first and second horizon still exist out there, right? Is that there's a set of people who are starting to realize, man, we are hitting up against this like barrier that we just can't get past because the systems in themselves, the 180 days a year, the 6.5 hours a day, those sorts of structures, the 30 kids in a classroom aren't actually ideal for what we're trying to build. And what we're recognizing is what we're trying to build isn't somebody who knows a ton of content, right? Although content is really important. It's a person who not only knows content, but also has the skills to navigate the future. And that's where this third horizon of learning has been emerging, right? And the third horizon of learning, which is the future of learning or a future ready ecosystem of learning, is what Learner Studio is building out. And the basic premise here is that the primary purpose of learning is to inspire and prepare young people for life, career, and democracy in the age of AI for the individual and common good. And if we believe that's our North Star of like human flourishing, right, then what we do, what we build would look totally different than today, right? And so we're building that world. And it's not us alone. And it's not that it's something that didn't exist. We've had really, really great organizations like Big Picture Learning, like Remake Learning out of Pittsburgh, who have been doing a lot of really cool things. One Stone School up in Idaho have been really figuring out how do you create active, learner-driven, learner-centered environments? How do you move learning beyond, or not move it, but recognize that learning happens beyond the 4 walls of a classroom? How do we credit learning for young people in ways that make sense rather than like I could go give the best speech in the world at my church, but if I don't do that in the 4 walls of my classroom in English class, it won't count. And I might get an F in English and get a rousing applause in at church from this thing, right? It just doesn't make sense for a young person, right? Because AI is impacting life, career, and democracy, we think it changes not only what kids need to know, but how they can learn it. So on the what part, right, like those thick content standard binders of like all this stuff we need to know, we think, to put in Joel Mehta's words, we should Marie Kondo the curriculum, right? Like there are pieces that we don't all need, but we force down people's throats anyways. And at the same time, that can create the space for the relationship based and relationship driven real world learning that young people want, right? And then on the how side of things, we think that AI can really unlock individual potential in a way that we haven't seen before. So instead of a young person having to wait for an adult to figure out what their next steps are, they can design for themselves. They can build the world that they want, right? I'll give you a quick example. There's a young girl, a seventh grader, who is in a program called RevX. She was using an AI tool called Inquire. And I was chatting with her. I was facilitating a panel that she was on just a few weeks back. And she got really interested in this topic of food insecurity. And she's like, yeah, like food insecurity impacts my family. It impacts my community. I want to know more about it. I don't understand why it exists because I'm also seeing people throwing a lot of food away. There's like food waste problem, right? Remember, again, this is like a seventh grade young lady, right? She used this tool, Inquire, which is an AI tool that allows people to build their own project-based learning plans and sort of like processes to help to figure out, hey, I want to investigate this question of food waste and food insecurity. Help me do that. Inquire pulled in the content standards that she was supposed to be learning as a seventh grader, including things like fractions that she's like, I had no idea that had something to do with food insecurity and those sorts of things. And it built out with her teacher, a really amazing self-directed learning plan that she could follow. And so she ended up learning all sorts of amazing things that are both content-based and real-world skills for herself, right? And so anyways, that's the sort of future I imagine for every young person, a future both in community with people and able to really give back to your community.
Yeah, that's a great story and a cool tool, like a really cool way of understanding how you can make learning feel more applicable. I often think a lot of our assessment processes and the way we learn feels very superficial. It's like you only learn this way when you're in a school building. Then
Yeah.
you go and you get a job. There are pieces of what you learn that are relevant, but the way you apply it are totally different. I think even the thoughts that schools have about use of AI as cheating versus the way
Yeah.
employers feel about AI as you should use this to get more work done can be a huge disconnect. And so I think it's really that example in particular, I think shows how you could use technology to be able to make an experience that models what people do in the real world.
Yeah, I think when AI is used appropriately, it gets used in what I've been calling pro-human ways, right? So we have a lot of people who have been talking about AI to augment capacity or to replace capacities, right? Like make you like, you can do more faster, or maybe you don't have to do whatever anymore. I actually think the real question we should be asking is how can we use AI to make us better human beings? How can I actually get it to sharpen my creativity skills, my collaboration skills, all those sorts of things, right? And in a pro-human AI world, what ends up happening is that at the center is the human, not the tool. Instead of imagining AI as being like a bunch of screens that we're all sitting on 24 hours a day, new AI tools are emerging that do not require a ton of screen interface and those sorts of things. I think we can enter a world in which we have really remarkably more human and humane experiences of learning in classrooms, outside of classrooms, across the world for every single kid. Where right now we just couldn't do it because those AI tools didn't exist.
Right. There's new innovations that are possible that weren't possible 5 years ago. And so I think it'll take a little bit of time for us to be able to see the benefit of those tools. But we are, as you're saying, and there's tools, this Inquire tool didn't used to exist, and people couldn't have been able to build this tailored project plan that pulls in standards several years back. And so it's kind of amazing what's possible now. And that makes me wonder, okay, so there's these cool tools that exist.
Yeah.
There's people who work with students every day, but
Yeah.
there's also a million new tools that are, it's like decision fatigue. Which is the right tool to use? How do you make decisions? And
Yeah.
so, there's tools that exist that can make a more pro-human world and classroom. Then there's educators and education leaders who
Yeah.
are trying to navigate all the things they've always had to navigate in education that are challenging and figure out what to choose. For the systems that exist today, how do you take a first step toward figuring out which things matter? How can we use this today for the teacher who may be exploring or the district leader who may be the only person in their district right now who's thinking about this?
So when I was in Gwinnett County Public Schools and initially heading up our first ever Department of Innovation, people came to me early on and are like, okay, what's the idea? What are we doing? And I'm like, I think you've gotten my role wrong. They're like, no, you're like the innovation guy. You're going to tell us like what the thing is and we're going to execute. And I'm like, actually, I think my role as a head of innovation is to help build an environment in which everyone can innovate and to solve the problems that are most pressing to them right now in new ways, right? And to see the world as it could be and to start building towards there. So my job really as the head of innovation was to create the environment, the holding space, right? The psychological safety, those sorts of things, right? I think we're in a similar world with AI, where right now, rightfully so, there are a bazillion tools. And each tool says, I will do X for you. And what I'm actually realizing is that the tools that I think will be successful in the long run are the tools that actually enable you to figure out what your own problems are and to build the solutions you want, right? So for example, there's an organization called PlayLab, which is a really remarkable AI tool that essentially makes it so that every young person and teacher can build their own chat-based AI tools. Let's say you're an educator and you're like, look, I am swamped with trying to give people feedback and I just don't know how to do it because there's just one of me and there's 30 kids. There's an educator who actually used PlayLab to build his own feedback agent that was trained on his own feedback, on some random stuff from the internet, but on what he wanted to be trained on his own curriculum materials and that sort of stuff, and could help double and triple the amount of feedback he could be giving to kids directly. And that way, what happens is when the kid has their hand raised and eventually just puts it down because the teacher doesn't show up, instead of that, the kid can go interact with the teacher's AI that makes it so they can get, 80 to 90% of what the teacher would have told them in that moment, right? Meanwhile, what the teacher is doing is working one-on-one with the kids and building that relationship with the kids where it's like, oh, you really need my touch. Like this feedback tool is not going to help you out. And so what essentially happens in the case of PlayLab is you teach one tool. It's kind of like the teach a man how to fish sort of deal, right? I think many tools are just giving people fish rather than going like, what do you want to do and how do you want to do it? And I think tools like PlayLab will end up winning the day, both because they enable you to build, like identify your own problems and to build your own tools, but also because they appreciate the expertise and the sort of professionalism of the teachers, of the principals, where I think many technologists are actually viewing as teachers and educators as the problem. And I'm like, no, I think that's completely wrong. So I think the future will end up like in the short run, you're right. There are a million tools and I think they're really fun to play with. Most of those tools won't exist 24 months from now, or they will get pulled into other bigger tools or consolidating down, and we'll end up with a smaller slate of tools and with a set of tools to just let you build whatever you want. I think the teacher training and stuff like that really needs to be around understanding how AI works so that when you get those new tools, like the ones where you can find your own problem and build your own tools, they can actually use them effectively.
You're ready to go. And so it's not so much about teaching people how to use the technology that you have access to, and even maybe some of this underlying how does AI actually function, and not just like, here's a chatbot, here's ChatGPT, you can ask questions to it, but what makes ChatGPT run so that you can, I think whenever you understand a little bit how a technology works, you can make better choices about how to use it or fix it or problem solve with it. I don't know much about my car engine, but if I did, I could probably figure out what the weird noise was.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key, right? But you also, though, know enough about your car that you don't use it to try and like float across the ocean, right? And like right now, there's some people who are trying to use AI tools in ways where I'm like, oh man, that's like a car trying to float across the ocean. Like, no, don't use it for that. That's not the thing, right? But I think just like the internet, where like at the beginning we were really prescriptive around you use it in this way and don't click on Wikipedia and all these sorts of things, right? I think we're at a moment where tech is moving faster. People in education are moving faster, and we'll be able to get people to understand enough where they can build and use things as they need to in their own environments.
I think we've talked a lot about the 7th grader, and then we talked about educators being able to use a tool like PlayLab. It's making me think about underlying core competency. What is the learning that you have to build a project plan for yourself that's self-directed? What is the core competency that we need in educators that they're like, let me understand the underlying problem and then solve my core competency? I also think like the students of today become the teachers of tomorrow. And so like, as you build those skills, you're really shaping the workforce as well. So I'm curious, what do you see as those core competencies, the things we need to focus on?
Yeah, I think the interesting part is that as human beings, we actually start off with these core competencies, right? Like no one has to teach a baby to learn, right? Like they just do it, right? Like we're like naturally wired for it, right? But what happens is that those wires get cut and broken and beaten out of us through our entire learning experience. From the moment we get told, no, no, you have to stand in a line in this in the hallway in order to go use the bathroom. So you must raise your hand in order to get attention and help. We start undoing those natural processes of learning. And even how we set up schools right now, in theory, the way that people perceive it is, oh, the kid knows nothing. You go into a room and then the teacher gives them that information and knowledge, as opposed to maybe the knowledge exists out there. It's commoditized at this point. There used to be a time when owning a book was a really big deal because there weren't very many books. Or before that, where knowing the professor who knew the thing was important because there's no other way to get access to her manuscripts or those things, right? I think we're in a different world fundamentally now where the core competencies are really about being human, being creative, being exploratory, being adaptive, right? And LearnStudie actually put out a paper on human skills in the age of AI, where we took like a million different sort of frameworks and things like that were out there. And we had them boiled down to saying, hey, look, we can't have like 500 different competencies for people. What are the things that drive everything? And they ended up being things like emotional intelligence, adaptability, creativity. And it ended up with like a core of 12. And it was like, in addition to these 12 skills, people need to have agency and recognize that they can do things themselves, right? With these skills. And they need to be transferable, meaning transferable across contexts. So if you can only communicate in a particular context, that's not going to help you. You have to be able to communicate in a variety of different circumstances and contexts and things. And the weird part is I think we've all known these skills for a long time. We all know it when we see it in a young person, but we've never explicitly built our systems at scale to build those competencies. Those things have happened by accident as a kid learns content. Now what we're saying is, why don't we spend as much time thinking about the skill development in a lesson plan as we do the content that's supposed to come across in that same lesson?
It's the almost more time thinking about how do we have the skills that you need to be successful alongside how do you have the knowledge you need to be successful, because knowledge really isn't a commodity anymore. And we don't have to remember as much because we have access almost immediately to a lot of the knowledge that we used to need to memorize or hold with us, in our
I
brain.
think that's true, but we still need to know a bunch of stuff because like critical thinking, for example, can't be built without content knowledge. But I think it actually changes a lot of how we deliver content. For example, if I was trying to teach you leadership, sitting you down and just talking to you about leadership, that doesn't do it. You actually have to experience it. You have to go out and try and lead a team. You have to fail. You have to try. Same thing with creativity, same thing with communications, all that sort of stuff. I think what we're pushing in terms of the third horizon, the future of learning, is that young people just need a bunch more at-bats, right? Like they need practice. They want the practice. They're telling adults, we are bored out of our minds because we can't figure out why we're sitting here. And adults are sitting there going, we are bored out of our minds teaching you in this way. But we think that's how we have to do it because of this test at the end. And what we're actually saying is we think you can actually both learn more stuff and know how to do things if you do it in an active, engaging, sort of inspired way, rather than like, I'm going to teach you today about good character. And I'll tell you the 3 rules and you're going to do them. It's like, that's not how life works.
It's integration. Like if you're building a project-based learning system where you're learning about food insecurity in your community, you're naturally learning about citizenship and other of these skills.
All the things.
Yeah, all the things while you learn. Well, I have so appreciated this conversation, and I'm going to ask you my last question that I always end on. And it is, what is the thing about AI that gives you the most hope? And is there something that sparks fear or concern in you on the flip side? And so I'm curious, as we've talked about all of this potential, what do you see as hopeful and what do you see as concerning?
So I know there are a lot of predictions and things like that about what's going to happen 10 to 15 years out and those sorts of things. And what I love about predictions is that they're all dependent on what human beings decide to do or not do, right? And like AI, just like any other tool, is just a tool. And how we use it matters more than what the tool is. So for example, I could give you a hammer today and you could use it to hit somebody in the head, or you could use it to build a house, right? But it doesn't make the hammer good or bad. It's the person using the hammer in this case, right? And obviously we need to have safety. Like you don't want to give a 1-year-old a hammer and like see what happens, right? And you want to train a person on how to use it appropriately and give them the ideas of what could be, right? But the reason I say this is that I think the thing that worries me the most about AI is the human use of AI. Specifically, Like in education right now, 90% of the use cases are around efficiency of our current system. And we're essentially like, we know the current system doesn't work. Let's make it faster. I'm like, what? Let's make it easier to do the current system. Like, nobody likes the current system. Why are we spending so much money on this? There's a huge market out there of people buying tools to do stuff faster, right? Where I'm like, no one wants to do it faster. They don't want to do it at all. Let's find the new things to do. And so what I'm worried about is we'll use this once in a lifetime technology to make faster the worst things about the world. When actually what gives me hope is the people who are like, wait, hold on a minute. Let's use this tool to unlock human potential in new ways that we've never thought of before. Let's make sure that the seventh grader can tackle problems in her community that she didn't even know existed previously and wasn't going to have the time of day to tackle those things, right? Let's make it so that an educator with these tools can be more human with the person that they're facilitating learning for and navigating life with, right? And we're seeing that. There are really great examples of places where these tools are being built in pro-human ways, and that's what makes me hopeful, right? And so to the extent that like what I'm worried about is people just think the future happens and it happens to you, it's like, nah, we build the future. We have an active role in shaping it. And so if we can embrace that active role in a positive way, not in a like, oh, we're just going to ban the first thing that gets us worried, I think we can do amazing things for the world.
I'm still thinking about that image Babak shared of a seventh grader using AI not to skip her homework, but to navigate the complex data of food insecurity in her own backyard. It's a powerful reminder that while we often worry about AI making us less human, the right tools, the pro-human tools, can actually sharpen our empathy, our creativity, and our agency. As Babak said, the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something that we build with every choice we make. Whether you are a district leader navigating 26,000 employees, or a teacher in a one-room district office, or a teacher with 30 students and not enough desks, the goal remains the same: preparing young people for life, career, and democracy. If you'd like to dive deeper into the frameworks we discussed, I highly recommend checking out Learner Studio's recent papers, Human Flourishing in the Age of AI and Human Skills in the Age of AI. We've linked those along with Babak's LinkedIn and other resources in our show notes at kinwise.org. If you like the show, the best way to support is to subscribe, share with a friend, or leave a quick review. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and stay Kinwise.